You know, earlier this week, I confess, I've never been to this memorial, and I've lived here now for 5 years and growing. And I felt a little sad about that. How was I going to come to you guys with any level of authenticity, having never been here and making this the first moment I stepped on these hallowed, holy grounds? And so I came to this site to quietly walk these grounds, alone and in silence, among the names of those reflected on all these bricks along the way. So many we honor here today. They were there, the names of real people. Not a history lesson or a statistic, but a visible reminder that these military men and women and veterans were very real people and are today. They each served their country at different times in different ways, but they were like you and I. Blood, bone, tissue, hearts and dreams with families who loved and cared for them, who grieved for them, and many who still do. They had real stories like yours and mine. And as I walked among them in this hallowed space, Psalm 51:10 kept ringing in my mind, reminding me to be very present to where I was and where we all are today. I kept hearing, create in me a new heart, renewing in me a right spirit as I stood here, to make sure I was no longer just figuring out stuff to do for a speech. I was here now, at that moment, to be with the spirit of real people who served and sacrificed, and to take a still moment, as I would encourage all of you to do, to stand in their presence. Walking by the name of William B. Wallace, a veteran of the Revolutionary War in 1757. Hear me say that, the Revolutionary War. And Colonel William Nelson of the same war, who served at the Battle of Yorktown just south of here, a real person, made me stop and remember, without them, you and I would have no country to serve some 200 years later, called the United States of America. Wallace and Nelson were no longer just a statistic to me, associated with the 25,000 wounded and 50,000 dead in that conflict that established our beloved nation. I was reminded in a very real way when I saw their names that since April of 1775, 41 million Americans have put on the uniform, and over 1 million of those have paid the ultimate sacrifice, and their families making that many more. That's why we gather today. Yes, to honor the 1 million, but also the 41 million who have served, are serving, and will serve in uniform in the future, because they are all real and visible people who had a passion to serve, like many here today. When I walked by the name of the War of 1812 veteran Robert Benson and Lieutenant Colonel John D. Bruce, who served in the Civil War, I paused. And suddenly those wars I have long studied academically in all my military schools and the like were made more real by the sacrifice of a named person known to someone in this community, not just a number somewhere between 640,000 and 700,000 killed and wounded in the Civil War. Maybe it's because of this pandemic that has separated us for so long, but as I walked and saw more and more names, suddenly I didn't feel so alone anymore. You know, veterans are like that. We feel better in communities of others, especially in communities of veterans. So walking by the name of World War I veteran Captain Albert Kulig of the U.S. Army Medical Corps and World War II and Korean and Vietnam veteran Master Sergeant John W. Kane and Colonel John Edwards and Stafford's own Earl L. Limerick Jr., who was killed in World War II in 1945, and Private First Class Theophile Fakir, a Silver Star winner who served in Luzon from 42 to 45, or 22-year-old Private First Class F.W. Lantham, who died at Anzio Beach in World War II. Maybe it was a beautiful day like today where being outside just reminded me that the world, despite all this current chaos, suddenly blessed me with the knowledge and experience that I was surrounded by these spirits of these amazing, amazing people. And I felt in those moments, as I hope you do today, the very real spirit of those folks. Regardless, as I walked and read each brick, like the one for Herman Lee Snellings, killed in action in World War II, and James F. Merritt of the 1st Marine Division in Okinawa in April of 1945, I was physically and spiritually inspired. Knowing that real people who served and died in that service, as well as those who continue to serve in uniform, made a real difference in the world, but more specifically in the lives you and I get to lead every day. Their spirits filled the air around me, as I know they do around you today, as I walk by each of them, feeling the need to whisper, "Thank you, thank you, thank you for your service and sacrifice." Then I started to see the names of the Vietnam veterans like Lieutenant General Ron Christmas, United States Marine Corps, retired, instrumental in the building of this memorial so we all could remember. And I paused again because, you see, I'm the daughter of a Vietnam veteran and a military spouse who was left behind with 4 children when he went off to war, Lieutenant General Bill Hilsman and Mrs. Jean Hilsman. I remember when I was 7 years old, just like it was yesterday, waving through the bedroom window of my Springfield, Virginia home to my dad, headed off to war so far away. I also remember my mom the entire next year taking on massive responsibilities for the family while she worried about her husband in harm's way, like so many of those who stay behind do even today. I was old enough even then to remember how our Vietnam veterans did not receive the reception they should have when they came home. I know how much better the reception for returning service members is today, because you, our Vietnam veterans, made sure it was better. It is one of the reasons I have such a special place in my heart for our Vietnam veterans, and why I cannot allow a day like today to go by without saying to each of you, welcome home. If you are a Vietnam veteran, would you either, if you can, stand, if not, raise your hand, or stand if you can so we may honor you. Welcome home. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your service and sacrifice, and thank your families equally as much. Then came the heroes from my generation, those that served in the Cold War, the Gulf War, Bosnia, Panama, Haiti, Somalia, OIF, OEF, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and every conflict and peacetime humanitarian and training operation in between. While more real to me, it still gave me pause when I saw the many names. I spent time in silence with Sergeant First Class J.W. Johnson, United States Army, who was killed in action in 2017 in Niger, and Air Force's Mark E. Stanton II, killed in Afghanistan in May of 2009. But I have to admit, I came to a full stop over here when I looked upon the brick with the name Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Herman, Marine aviator who gave his life in service to his country in the waters near Japan in December of 2018. Now, I didn't know Kevin personally, but met his father during the struggle to find appropriate burial options for him and his family after the tragic loss of Lieutenant Colonel Herman and his crew. For many of these families, they still grieve the loss of their heroes, especially on days like Veterans Day. We join them today in that spirit of grief and gratitude for their sacrifice and all those who have died in service to their country. I noted 3 other bricks, almost by exception, as I walked through this beautiful memorial designed by Aaron Brown of North Stafford High School. I used to live close by there. Admittedly, I could have missed more of them, but I found only 3 bricks recognizing the fastest growing group of veterans in our country, our women veterans. I saw Specialist Morgane Macbeth, a 19-year-old woman from Fredericksburg, Virginia, serving as a paratrooper and combat medic who died from injuries occurred in Iraq. Captain Linda G. Davis, an Army nurse in World War II, and Captain Patricia Gooden of the Navy Nurse Corps. Maybe because I'm a senior woman veteran, but I find without even trying, I end up looking for those names in things in places like this, because I know firsthand how often women veterans are invisible in their communities when they come home. Even in Stafford County and Fredericksburg City communities, superb women veterans like retired U.S. Army Master Sergeant Lisa Gregory, former Department Director for Disabled American Veterans, who served more than 20 years in the Army, but continued to serve in retirement in a significant leadership position at DAV. When all of us voted this year, we were asked about two initiatives, and one of them she was massively active on to ensure that our 100% permanent and total disabled veterans could improve their mobility through specially adapted vehicles by eliminating some of the financial burdens to getting them adapted. Lisa Gregory, along with your other colleagues in DAV, and I'm sure all the other veteran service organizations here and in the state, led this charge, and it just passed. Thank you, Lisa, for your leadership. There's so many other leading amazing women veterans like my friend and colleague, Dr. Nicole Oxley. I already mentioned her, of Oxley Enterprises in Fredericksburg, frequently featured by the Department of Veterans Affairs as a rising woman veteran business leader. With women veterans expecting to reach 20% of all living veterans in 20 years, I expected to see more here reflected in the bricks among us. So let us commit, just as the Department of Veterans Affairs is asking all of us to do nationwide, through their I Am Not Invisible or IANI campaign, to bring women veterans out of the invisible places of our community, to find these women and tell them, you are not invisible to us. In my concluding remarks, I think it's important to mention one more thing. To raise this issue, I'm reminded of the story of Stafford County's most famous veteran and this nation's first president. On the morning of March 15, 1783, General George Washington made a surprise appearance at an assembly of Army officers in Newburgh, New York. Frankly, he went there to calm them down because they had growing frustrations over back pay and benefits. As General Washington prepared to address them, he first removed a letter from his breast pocket that he'd received from a member of Congress. He then hesitated for a moment as he looked down at the letter, and he fumbled through his jacket to pull out a pair of spectacles from his pocket, putting them on. In almost an apologetic tone, General Washington said, "Gentlemen, you must pardon me. I have grown old in the service of my country and now find that I am growing blind." In that brief and authentic moment of vulnerability, a nod to his own growing disabilities as a direct result of his military service, the general changed the very tenor of this meeting. While we are gathered here today remembering and honoring those who gave the ultimate sacrifice, let us not forget those who remain among us, their families and caregivers, who suffer from both the visible and the invisible wounds of their service. Let's participate in activities of our tremendous veteran and military support organizations I mentioned earlier to check in on our veterans and their caregivers. Make sure they're okay during these really trying times, especially as this pandemic impacts their abilities to being among others in community. That's a very important suicide preventive measure. Every preventive buddy check we can do can be a life-saving few minutes needed to prevent a suicide. Don't just check, by the way, on our young veterans. Did you know that 65% of all veteran suicides are committed by veterans who are 65 years and older? These veterans are real people who need other real people to walk beside them, and if we cannot walk during this time beside them, to call them, to check on them, to give an ear to them, to listen to them. And I know every one of us has at least 5 minutes to spare to save a life. So on this day that began as the commemoration of Armistice Day and later became, under President Eisenhower, Veterans Day, as we used to say at VA, every day is Veterans Day. Because a veteran in physical or emotional pain, those days can seem impossible to face without a buddy. Let us be a buddy to stand beside, to call, to check in on another. Because as this last brick I read from Rodney E. Thompson Middle School PTO says, we can't know them all, but we owe them all. So may God bless our veterans, their families and caregivers and survivors, our military men and women in service and their families. And may God bless the United States of America, and let us remember these very real heroes, past, present, and future. Thank you.